Alright, so we're going to do a support resistance solver tutorial. So drop the support resistance solver on here and let's connect it up. And let's see here. Let me plug in the pivots indicator here. And let's do a little search for pivots. There's our pivots. Little side note here about some of these pivots indicators that come with NinjaTrader, right? That you do need to calculate from intraday data. So yeah, if your chart is of an intraday data chart, then make sure the calculate is set to intraday, right? So yeah, NinjaTrader does have a problem. Still, as far as I know, it has a problem if you try and calculate from daily bars when you're working on a intraday chart there. So yeah, don't mix and match there. So let's calculate from intraday data. All right. And the one thing that's unique about the support resistance solver is that you can actually select all of the plot lines here. So this solver was, you could say it was kind of specifically built for pivot type of indicators, right, that have multiple support resistance lines, plots all within, the same indicator there. So let's select that. And all right, so now we're ready to go here. So now let's kind of go through all the different settings here and options for this solver. All right. So the first one and the most important one here is price to the support resistance line mode here. So we have two modes, and in BloodHound version 1, they used to be called headwind and tailwind mode. And of course, that kind of name is it isn't very clearly defined here. So we have a better name here. So the first one mode here, headwind mode, tells you, is price far enough away from the support resistance line to take a trade into that support resistance line, right? So is price far enough away to trade into that support resistance line there? And that is the default mode there, right? Far enough away. So for example here, and actually, let's see. Yeah, let me make some quick adjustments to the distance targets here, and we'll get back to this in a moment. I'm just going to make some quick adjustments here. And let's see, I'm on the NQ. So, all right, let's do 10. Yeah, 10 and 10. And let's see. Well, actually, no, on the NQ chart, 10 is probably not far enough away. There. Let's try 30 and 30. Oh. There we go. Okay. Yeah, this is a little better. All right. So my distances are 30 points. And getting back to the mode here, right, we're trying to identify is price far enough away from the support resistance line to take a trade into it. And so the distance here is saying we need at least 30 points of clearance to trade into a support resistance line here. So let's go to the chart, right? And let's also, let me put a little box on here. There. And I'm going to set this box to 30 points in height. All right. So the height of this is 30 points. So if I put it on S1 and look at the long outputs here, right? Yeah, so I'm going to stretch this out a little bit more here, right? So we have a long output on that bar, and we have a bunch of long outputs on these three bars here, right? Long output, long output, long output. So if you look at the closing price of that bar, right? Closing price there, closing price there, there, and there. We can see that the closing price of this bar is more than 30 points away from S1, right? And we can see these bars where the closing price is inside, right, this 30-point range, right, there's no long output. So when there is a long output, it's saying we have at least 30 points that the closing price is at least 30 points or more away from S1. So we have the clearance necessary to trade into S1, right? And probably, you know what? Let me go ahead and make a quick adjustment. Let's go 50 points since we're on the NQ here. And take a look at that. So if I put, so if I require at least a 50-point clearance, right, now it's only this one bar here has that 50 points of clearance now. And actually, let's go ahead and let's adjust this. There, I'll make my little box 50 points now. Let's put that up there, right? Yeah, so we can now see, right, only this one bar here, the closing price, is more than 50 points away to trade into S1, right? And the opposite is true for S2. Let me put this down here, right? So obviously the closing price of all of these bars are more than 50 points away if you want to take a short trade into S2, right? And if we look, right, we have a, well, actually, let's just stay right here. All right, so from right here, right, we have a short output on all of these bars, right? So we can take a short trade into S2, no problem. Now, when it, if looking at the output, when it switches from short to long, well, look at the closing price of the bars, right? This close was below, underneath S1. So the short output is referring to taking a short trade into S2. Now, the next bar closes above S1. So let's put our box up there, right? So this long output is telling us there is more than 50 points of clearance to take a long trade into the PP line, right? So because the closing price is now above S1, right, the support resistance solver is evaluating the PP line and S1 line. When the closing price is below S1, right, the support resistance solver is evaluating S1 to S2 there, right? And if I take this other one and put it up here, like so, right, we can, and again, look at the closing price. So obviously the closing price is just above S1, so we can't take a short trade. So, right, all these closing prices are too close to S1 to take a short trade into S1. And we do, yeah, this is actually really good here. It's nice that the market works with you once in a while, right? So looking at, right, these 50-point boxes here, right, there's a little overlap. There's a few points of an overlap. And this bar happened to close inside of that overlap, right? And inside that overlap, there's no output here. And so there's no output because, right, there is the distance between PP and S1 is less than 100 points, right? So yeah, these two lines are actually too close together to, yeah, so when the closing price is in the middle, because they're so close together, you can't take a long trade into PP because you're less than 50 points away, and you cannot take a short trade into S1 because there's less than 50 points of clearance to trade into that. So that's why there's no output there. So, so when the closing price, right, is near S1, then there is 50 points of clearance to trade, to take a long trade into or up to, right, the PP line there. So let's see here. Let's take a look at some of these other ones. Yeah, let's go down here a little bit. So again, this bar right here, right, closed kind of in that no man's zone there, where it's less than 50 points to go short into S1, and it's less than 50 points to take a long trade into the PP line there. But when the closing price is closer to the PP line, then we have plenty of clearance, right, 50 points of clearance to take a short trade into S1 there. So that essentially is what headwind mode is. If the closing price is within 50 points to the nearest support resistance line, then you have a headwind trying to trade into that support resistance line there. Take a look at these here, right? So if you wanted to go long on any of these bars, there's a headwind trading into going long to trade into S1, right? There's a headwind, right? You have a resistance line. So don't go long because of the headwind trading into S1. So, and of course, the distance here is all customizable there. So we'll get back to that here in a moment here. So let's cover the next mode here, which is tailwind mode. Right, so tailwind mode essentially can be used to identify a potential bounce trade off of a support resistance line. All right, and let's see, this time, yeah, I'm going to once again, let's set these to points. And let's just go 10 points. And 10 points. There we go. All right. For some reason, it's not sticking. There we go. Okay. So, oops. Wrong one. There we go. Up here. All right. So tailwind mode is identifying, is price near enough or close enough to the support resistance for a possible bounce off of that support resistance line. So let's see here. Let's modify my little box here to give us a 10-point range. There we go. All right, so looking at this bar here, right, we can see the closing price is inside, right, my little 10-point range here. So it is within 10 points of S1. And so this short output is saying, hey, there could be a possible short bounce off of S1 here. But then price crosses above it. Right, so on the next bar here, we have a long output. So right, that closing price is still within 10 points of S1, but now that it's above it, it's now saying, that obviously, looking at the price action here, it's saying that, hey, we're 10 points, we're within 10 points on top of S1, so there could be a continuation here going on. Obviously, this is, not technically what we would consider a bounce, but remember, the support resistance solver is not looking at price action. It's just looking at where is the closing price in relationship to your support resistance line. Yeah, so even though we're getting a long output, right, it's not saying that, oh, there's a long bounce here, because the solver does not look at where is price coming from, right? It's just saying where is the closing price right now here. So yeah, same thing with over here, right? We can see this closing price is within 10 points of S1, but it's below it, so it's giving us a short there, right? So if you do actually want to use this, as a possible price bounce system here, right, you need more logic than just a support resistance solver, right? So you need other nodes, identifying where is price coming from, too. So that way, you could filter out this short, and you could filter out this long with, right, other solvers and more logic there. You can see that, okay, yeah, price came from above, so so this is obviously not a short bounce because price was above previously. But using, thinking of tailwind in terms of a bounce, makes more sense there, right, for most people here. But again, really, all the solver is doing, the support resistance solver, all it's doing is just looking at where is the closing price in relationship to each of the support resistance nodes there. So let's see. All right. Yeah, so that does it for the two nodes there, or two modes, sorry. So now let's kind of go into some of the other settings here. So we have this must agree with swing trend direction there. So so what that is let me get, I need to get the swing trend indicator on the chart here. All right, swing trend, and let's see. All right, so we're using 5 and 20. Let's put that on the chart. There we go. All right, so let's enable this again. And you'll notice when you do enable that, let's see, where did it go? There we go. So the swing trend parameters, this section becomes visible here. So you can adjust the swing strength, the swing type, right? Basically, right, those are the indicator settings for the swing trend indicator there. Right. And if you uncheck it, right, we can see it disappears there. So check it back. So what this does is it applies a filter here. If you notice, right, the short signal disappeared. That was right there. Let's uncheck that. Right, let me put, all right, there we go. Now I can move that, right? So you notice the short signal will disappear when I enable this filter. And that's because the swing trend indicator is now in an uptrend. All right, so at some point back here, probably, yeah, one of these bars here, the swing trend started pointing upwards, right? So it's in an uptrend. So since, right, the option says must agree with the swing trend. So only long outputs are available now because the swing trend is in an uptrend. And if we just look back here, right, we can see the swing trend is somewhere around, well, yeah, definitely by this bar, the swing trend started moving down, right? It started a downtrend. And so we have this short output here, which is in agreement with the swing trend, right, sloping down there. So one thing to remember about the swing trend indicator and all indicators is, right, obviously it takes a couple of bars before the swing direction changes there, right? So obviously, you're not going to, the swing trend indicator doesn't know that this is the low point in real time, right? A couple of bars have to close before the swing trend can actually change directions there. Right? So that's all that is, just a simple filter there where your outputs must match the direction of the swing trend. Right? Let's change modes here. Let's go back to headwind mode, like so, and oh yeah, that's right. All right, so we don't actually have that option anymore there. All right, next setting here is select the type for support resistance lines, right? So there's 3 different ways that you can set up, or 3 different modes that you can use for support resistance lines here, right? One, probably the main one there, is an indicator, which is what we're using right now, right? We're using the pivots, NinjaTrader pivots indicator there. Open this up a little bit more. There we go. So most people, are probably going to be using some sort of indicator, to draw those support resistance lines. Next one is you can actually use the linear regression channel. So let's see here. This is doing 40 and 4. So let me put that indicator on the chart. There we go, the linear regression. Oh, no, hold on. Wrong one. I want the linear regression channel. And there we go. It's a regression channel. There we go. All right, so let's make sure we match up the settings here, right, in the solver. 40, and the deviation width is 4. So let's set that to 4. There. There we go. All right. Now, one thing that's, should be apparent here, but just to make sure, right? Obviously, your regression channel width has to be wide enough so that you can actually get some sort of an output here, right? So in other words, make sure that your distances, right, your minimum and ideal distance, make sure they're not too wide there. And yeah, let's see here. Yeah, so 50 points actually still works here with the regression channel there, right? So as we kind of look through this, let's see here. Oh, interesting. So we can see that this bar, right, it has no output. right? So this bar here has no output, and that's because the closing price it's closer than 50 points to go long into the upper channel, and it's closer than 50 points to go short there. All right. So we don't actually know exactly where these lines are anymore, but well, actually, hold on. Let's actually use a different regression channel here. Let's use the one from BloodHound here. There we go. There's the regression channel. And let's put in 40 and 4. There we go. There. All right, so now we can actually step back. There. There we go. All right. All right, surprisingly, yeah, the channels actually didn't change much, but still, yeah, that closing price is within 50 points to go long into the upper channel here. So there's no output on that bar there, right? But these other bars, let's take a step back. Let's move that out of the way. And this is my 50-point box here, right? So we can see that at some point here, that, right, all of these bars are within that 50-point range there, so you can't, so there's no long output, meaning, right, you're too close to the upper channel to take a long trade. But you're far enough away from the lower channel here, so you can take a short trade. So there's at least 50 points of clearance to take a short trade into the lower channel there. And let's continue to back this up here. There. Well, that's a pretty steep angle. I'll just move this over here. So these bars here, right, there's a long and a short output. So that means we have 50 points of clearance to take a long trade into the upper channel or take a short trade into the lower channel. And again, this is headwind mode. So we have the support resistance solver set on headwind mode for this, for the regression channel there, right? So let's take a look at tailwind mode. So tailwind mode is going to make the most sense here if you're using a regression channel here as your support resistance input there, right? And yeah, here we go. Here's a good example. So, and one more. There we go. Yeah. So we can see that the closing price, right, of this bar, right, that closing price is just above the lower channel there. So that's within 10 points. Okay, so remember our for tailwind mode, our distances here, our distances are still set to 10 points here. So as price gets really close, right, to that lower channel there, we'll get a long output there. Right, now it's going to step forward here and see if we happen to get any more signals. Nope, no more signals there. There we go. There. So looking at this short there, right, the closing price of that bar is within 10 points of the upper channel line, right? So it's saying that, you know, we might, or it's, yeah, the support resistance solver is identifying that the closing price is close enough to the upper channel for a possible bounce off of that channel there. Right. So there you go. So there's a second input type is the regression channel. And the third type is just a imaginary price levels here. Imaginary price levels here. So when you're using price levels here, the starting price is 0, right? A value of 0 is your starting point. And then you put in an interval spacing here, right? So we have 100 points. So basically every 100 points on the NQ, right, the support resistance solver is kind of but it's using these imaginary price levels here, every 100 points there. So let's see what we have here. So we are still in, that's headwind. Let me switch it to tailwind mode there. Yeah, it's in tailwind mode. And let's draw a line at 500. There, at 500. So whenever the closing price, let's get rid of this indicator here. There we go. So whenever the closing price of these bars, right, get within 10 points of this 21,500 level there, right, we're getting a short because we're just below it there, right? And so some of the other imaginary values would be down here at 400, and we have another one up here at 600. There we go. Let's see if we get close to this one. Yeah, there we go. So here's the one at 21,400. And again, right, we can see the closing price of these two bars are within 10 points of this imaginary number here, 21,400. So we get a short, right? And then the closing price of this bar, right, is above that price level, so we're getting a long output since it's within 10 points above it. Right. So the using price levels here should be pretty self-explanatory. So you can put in the spacing of those price levels that you want there, and you can see here you can even specify an upper limit and a lower limit if you wanted to as well. So, all right. Yeah. So those are the 3 input types to set up or establish your support resistance lines or levels there. Right? Let's see. So I'm going to switch back to indicator. Let's see. Use indicator, and let me set up. Let me put the pivots back in there. There we go. Select them all. All right. There. And let me clean up these lines. Let's get rid of the regression channel. There. All right. So the next setting down here is you can actually specify what bar price you want to use, right? So far we've been using the closing price of the bar, but you do have all the other bar prices as well, right? You have the open, high, low, and close. You could use bid and ask, right? All the NinjaTrader bar prices you have access to there as well, including these kind of custom ones here, the body top and body bottom, and so forth there, right? So let's see here. And next one is the distance targets. So right, Yeah, I think the distance targets have already kind of been self-explained, as I was explaining the different modes here. But one thing to note is, let's put this back to headwind mode. So in headwind mode, the distances are minimum distance and ideal distance. So this solver, is still set up for using fuzzy logic there. So I think most people are going to want to keep these two distances the same here. So you just get this simple, yet true or false kind of output here, right? Yes or no kind of output. So either you can go long or you can go short. But I'll dive into the fuzzy logic just very superficially here because no one's really using it anymore. Yeah. So I'm going to set the minimum distance to 30. Oh. There we go. All right. So we have two distances here, right? So the minimum distance establishes the minimum distance at which we start generating an output here. And just making sure I didn't get those numbers reversed. Okay, yep. So if we look at the outputs here, actually I think I do have these backwards here. Yeah, give me a moment here. Let's reverse these. Oh, no, I did have it right. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we're in headwind mode. Okay, yeah, I'm thinking like tailwind mode. There we go. So, all right, headwind mode. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go from 20 to 50 here. So, all right. So, again here, our support resistance mode here is in headwind mode. So we're identifying that there's enough clearance to trade into a support resistance line here. So, all right. So when we look at the outputs here, right, the minimum distance here, I have it set to 20 points. So if the closing price gets within 20 points of a support resistance line, the output is set to 0. In other words, it is too close, right? The closing price is within 20 points, and that is just too close to take a trade, right, into whatever that support resistance line is. The ideal distance, right, to trade into a support resistance is 50 points or more away. So if we look at the output here, it says at 50 points, ideal distance here, right? And that is set to 1. So keeping those two numbers in mind here. All right, yeah. So it's going to take a look at this area here. Well, actually, I think that just gets too confusing there. All right, so looking at these, the closing prices of these bars. Right. So the close of this bar is definitely within this 20-point range here, right? It's within 20 points. And we can see that there's no short output here, right? So we can't, so the solver is saying, right, the support resistance solver is saying you're too close to S1 to take a short trade, right? There's no short output. You're too close there. And then finally over here, this bar here, the closing price of that bar is now at more than 20 points away. and we can see we actually get a little bit of a short output, right? Just a little bit there. So let's see here. This, yeah, if I remember, this is 10 points here, and there. Let me make this. I'm gonna make this 20 points. All right, yeah. So this box is now 20 points here, and our range, again, remember our range is from 20 to 50 points here. So if we're within 20 points, then our output is 0, meaning, you know, we're way too close. 20 points is too close to support resistance line to take a trade into it, right? So no short output there. But then once we go outside of 20 points to 50 points, and I'm kind of guessing this is probably pretty close to 50 points up here. I'm just going to eyeball this. Yeah, about there. All right. So I think the top of this is about 50 points here. Right. And if we look at these short outputs here, right, we're getting this variable output here, the fuzzy logic output. So as the closing price, right, ranges between 20 points and 50 points up here, right, our short output is going to range as well. And eventually, like over here, right, we can see this closing price is definitely above that 50-point level. And the output here, we can actually see it's -1, right? So we're getting a full 100% output there. Yeah, because the clearance to take a short trade is more than 50 points to take a short trade into S1 there. So we're getting a full output there. Right. And yeah, let's take a look at these outputs. Right. So this short output here is 0.375, right? So we're somewhere, yeah, close to kind of the middle between 20 points and 50 points there. It's actually a third away. And then as the closing price goes higher and gets closer to this 50-point distance, right, we can see the short output increases there. So now it's 73%. And now we're at 93%, right? So we can see the closing price is just a few points away from that 50-point range, right? So remember, the top of this rectangle here is approximately that 50-point distance away from S1 there. All right. So we can see as the closing price gets closer and closer to having that 50-point range, the short output is increasing there. So yeah, so that's just kind of a short example there of the fuzzy logic there. But again, most people aren't using fuzzy logic, but it is still there if anybody does want to use that there. So that is headwind mode here, right? So headwind mode has a minimum distance that you need to trade into a support resistance, right? So again, let's kind of go back. Yeah, let's go back to this bar here, right? We barely have a short output, right? And that's because the closing price is just a little more than this minimum distance here needed, right? This minimum 20-point distance to take a short trade into S1, that support resistance level there. All right, so that's your minimum. But ideally, you would like to have at least 50 points, right? That's your ideal distance clearance, right, to take a trade into the nearest support resistance, right? So you want at least 50 points away. And so as we step to this bar here, right, so the output is almost, the short output's almost 100%, though it's at 93%, right, because we're almost at that 50 point ideal distance there. Now, when we switch modes to tailwind mode here, then the distances go from ideal to maximum distance. Right? And let's see here. Let me set my maximum distance to 30. There. And let's see here. Yeah, so let's take a look at this area on the chart here, right? So ideally, we'd like the closing price to be within 10 points of, you know, that nearest support resistance level there, to take, you know, to be looking for a possible bounce right off of that level there. However, the maximum distance away would be 30 points here. So essentially we have the reverse of what we were just looking at previously with headwind mode, right? So let's see here, where, let me move this over. So if we look at the closing price here, and actually, so this is our 10 pointer. So let me get that on there. There. So yeah, we have 10 points to 30 points. And let's see, this is 20 points. Then we stack those on top of each other. There we go. All right. So this line here, right, is our maximum 30 points away from S1. And then this line here is our ideal 10 points. So we can see as the closing price gets closer and closer and closer to this ideal 10-point range, right, the short output increases, right, telling you that the likelihood of a short bounce, or again, remember, the support resistance solver isn't identifying that there is going to be a bounce. It's just saying that, hey, the closing prices of your bar is getting closer and closer to that 10-point range that you're looking for a possible short bounce there, right? So as the closing price gets closer and closer, right, the short output increases there. Right. And I think, let's take a look here. Yeah, so our short output is 29%. Let's call it, round it off to 29%, right? So that closing price is inside our 30-point range, right? That closes within our 30-point maximum distance there. But then as the closing price gets closer, right, then the short output goes to 79% now, right? And then our short output almost reaches 100%, right? It's at 99% there. So it's like probably the closing price is within one tick of our 10-point ideal range there, ideal distance there, right? Right. Ideal distance set to 10 points there. There we go. And now let's see. Oh, no. So looking at the output, it's not 100% yet. So even the closing price of this bar is not inside that 10-point range. And there we go. All right, so this bar here, if we look at the output, right, it says -1, so it's 100%. And we can see the closing price of this bar is inside this 10-point range here, right? That 10-point ideal distance there. All right, let's see. So that's your distance targets there, right? So when you're, just to recap, when you're using tailwind mode, you have an ideal distance and a maximum distance away. When you're using headwind, then you have a minimum distance and ideal distance away. So, and let's see here. All right. So next, yeah, we pretty much covered the outputs here when explaining the distance targets, but there's two outputs here that we haven't looked at yet. So our mode is set to headwind here, and so we have these extra this extra output here, no support resistance line. So in other words, a breakout here. And so I'm going to have to take a look at the chart. And let's see if we actually do get a breakout of the pivot lines here. Is that it? Or, yeah, all right. There. So we can see, right, there's no R3. Let me just double check. Oh, there is an R3. Okay. Yeah, where is R3? Oh, there it is. There's R3. All right. Let's see if we get a breakout of R3. All right. Well, yeah, it doesn't look like there's been any recent market movements, at least not on the NQ, to break out of R3, to break above R3 or break below S3. There we go. There's S3 here. So, so we'll just have to use our imagination here. There. So this no support resistance line breakout, right? We can see it's set to 1, and what that's for is if price was above R3, right? Essentially, there's no more support resistance levels above R3. So with this set to 1, that means you're going to get a long output, right? You'll get a long output as long as price is above our highest support resistance level, right? So R3 is right the highest level there. So if price is above it, right, there's no resistance above. So you're free to go take as many long trades as you want, right? So you're just going to get a long output there, continuous long output, kind of like what we see here, right? But again, this long output is only because, right, the distance to R3 is more than 50 points away, right? There's a huge distance there. But if the market was up here, you know, if price was up here, then yeah, there's no resistance above, so you'll get a long output there, provided, right, this is set to 1 here. So you could set that to 0, right? And so in which case, if price is above R3, then you'll get no long output, right? You'll prevent long signals from occurring because there won't be any long output here from the solver. And so vice versa, if the price is down below S3, right, then the opposite here occurs, right? There's no support underneath S3, so you would get a continuous short output saying that, you know, there's no support underneath price. So, right? So prices, you know, broke out to the downside, you know, where there's no more support, then you'll get a continuous short output there. So again, assuming this is left to 1, right? So this output, this output only applies, this no support resistance output here only applies when the market is below the lowest resistance or above the highest support there, right? All right. And so with that, let's see, yeah, that, well, okay, yeah, and then there's also, sorry, one more output here. Sometimes price can actually equal a support resistance price level there, right? Sometimes it can equal it exactly. So you got to decide, what do you want to do if it equals it? You know, do you want an output or do you not want an output there? So there, let's see if we can actually find on the chart where the closing price actually equals a support resistance line, which probably doesn't. No, okay. Yeah, we don't have any examples on the chart here of that ever occurring, but you know, that's pretty self-explanatory there. Yeah. Looks like Randy, has a follow-up question here. Randy's question actually isn't specifically on the support resistance solver, but he's asking, so going back to the bounce example, can you get a signal, then wait for the next bar or any bar to close below S1? Yes, you can. So let's see here. Let's put this. Let me set our support resistance solver back up here. So let's put it on tailwind mode there, and let's see here. I was probably using 10 and 10 for the distances there. Let's see. All right, I'm going to do this in another logic template here. And let's drag our support resistance solver on there. And let me clean up my chart. There we go. All right. So I think, Randy was looking for this here. This short here. So if you wanted to, so remember, this is not the support resistance is not identifying bounce signals. Of any, it does require other logic. So probably one of the other ones that you'll need is a inflection solver there, right? to make sure that price actually turns around and reverses right off of S1 there. And let's see if we actually have an example. Yeah, here we go. All right. So let's use this bar right here as our example there. Right? So we have our excuse me, our support resistance output there, right? Telling us that the closing price got within 10 points of the PP line there. And then the next step is to see, well, did price actually reverse off of that? We can see we have a down bar, right? So if we look at our inflection solver there, and let's set it to price. There we go. So now the inflection is actually set to price, right? And so we can see, right, we do have a short output here. So to connect these two together. So again, our support resistance solver is giving us an output, right, before price actually reverses there. So we need to shift this short output onto the next bar where price might then actually reverse, right? And where the inflection solver has the short output, right? So the inflection solver has a short output right on this bar. So we're going to take our support resistance and plug it into a function node, and we're going to use the look back here. So the look back, we're going to use this displacement, right, which is already set to 1 there. And so if we look at this now, there we go. So, right, this bar, which has the closing price within 10 points, well, that short has been shifted onto the next bar where the possible price reversal, right, or inflection might occur. And then now we can actually connect these together with an AND node, like so. There we go. Let's see if we have any more. Yeah, there we go. There's another one right there. So we can see that closing price of that bar got within 10 points, and then we had a bar reversal. And so let's see over here. Here we go, right? So remember, there was a short output there. Let's connect that up. There we go. Right, so there's that short, but price did not reverse, right? Just continued on, and so now there's no output there. There you go. Right, so there you go. There's just a very simple example there of connecting your support resistance in with a right price reversal there. All right, so there's Randy's follow-up question there.